event Gather Together. My name is Louise. I'm a bookseller at Red Kangaroo Books, and I'm so excited and happy to welcome John Spencer to talk about his book today, hosted by the wonderful Tanya Heaslip. Today we meet on the unceded lands of the Aranda people and acknowledge elders past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So Gather Together is an event that happens weekly on Wednesday lunchtimes just for the month of April. It's funded by the Alice Springs Town Council to revitalise Todd Mall. And this program has been curated in response to the media sensationalism about this town and the people in it. And our tagline is celebrating the power of storytelling to create new futures. And so I think that telling stories about our past and about the tensions and the beautiful parts of it is one big part of that. So we're very happy to have this event with John today. Last week with our first event, we had senior Aranda women who are poets from Running Water Community Press, and it was a real big honour to start that with those people, to start our event with those people. And they talked about the process of healing. So yes, we put on this event with the support of the Writers Centre, the administration supported them, and also Sam from Real Wire Productions has made sure that we're doing a live stream today. So that's very exciting. I'm going to hand over to Tanya and John. Thank you very much. Let's look at my hand.
Thank you, Louise. I'm not sure if you'll hear us through these mics, but we're live streaming to Sam. Welcome everyone, and particularly welcome John. Let me set the scene for you today. John Spencer is a living legend of Central Australia. He was born in 1941 and lived in a house just next door, pretty much, in the Gem Tree. It was a very rudimentary house. It was a dirt floor with lino on top, corrugated iron walls, no running water, no electricity. That's where he was raised with his beloved mother and siblings. He has led an incredible and inspiring life since then. He is now 82 years old, which is almost unbelievable. And I'd just like to read to you a quote from his book, which really tells us why we are all here today. My aim is to demonstrate that although life may be full of challenges, sadness and adversity, it is still possible to be strong and proud, to make good and to find happiness. Writing this book for John was unlocking a past of great sadness and adversity, as well as happiness and triumphs. It was a very personal thing to do. It's a very emotional book to read and a very emotional and wonderful story. So I'd like to ask you, John, to start by telling us about the moment that defined your life when you were 9 years old.
Well, as Tanya said, we used to live in a little old place right next door to us here. And it used to belong to a little old lady who owned a guest house up on the northern end of town, Mrs. Hazel Golder. Mum used to do the washing and ironing for Hazel, and that was to pay the rent. And this old house, as Tanya said, there's only corrugated iron, a bit of netting here and there. And to get hot water, we had a light of copper outside. Toilet was out the back, and they'd get our water out of a well. And if you walk around the back down here in the car park, you'll see a couple of big old cedar trees. That was in the backyard. We used to play under those cedar trees, and now they're huge, great big things. And you can still see where the well was. There's a bit of a sunken area in the tarmac around the back there. But in 1949, we moved from here to the east side. Mum had bought a block of land, I think it was Mill Street, not sure Mill Street or McMinn Street. But we didn't stay there very long because it wasn't very long after she took very ill. And she put me in the convent school, and I watched her walk out the door, and little did I know that it'd be the last time I'd ever see my mum. But it was a pretty rough period. I can say I waited a few days to see what happened, and on the 10th of April 1951 at 1:45, I still remember that date and that time, I got a call to go to the priest, and by the way they were looking at me, I knew it wasn't very good news. And he told me, instead of telling me that my mum died of her illness, which I knew she had, she was in a bad way when she left. He said to me a few other things. I don't remember what he said to me. I didn't hear a word. All he said to me afterwards, go to the church and pray for God. God took your mother away. Well, I sat in that church for 4 hours, and I never got an answer from God. So I walked away, and I said, that's when I lost faith in religion. I'm sorry to say, but that's when it happened. That I was there, they were coming in. Thanks, Steve. So, where was I? We was in there for quite some time, and a few days later, we had to clean out, the boys had to clean the water tank, or like a bit of a septic tank at the back for the boys' showers, and it flooded over and blocked up and all that thing. And there's me and 3 others. There was a couple on the other side of the hole, and I was on this side. And there's one of the boys, I don't know what and why he said it, he said to me, good job, your mother died. Well, I just exploded. I flew across, I don't remember jumping the hole, but I had him on the ground and I was choking him. Lucky a nun came along and took me off. But that was my introduction to a bit of life, and said, well, I know a lot of kids, small kids don't understand what happens sometimes, and they talk before they think sometimes. But I forgave him, but even though I forgot his name, I try to remember his name for years, even when I was writing this book. And one day, I remembered his name. And this same bloke that I nearly throttled, we were driving trucks together from Alice Springs to Tennant Creek. I wondered every time I arrived, we pulled up at Barra Creek on the way down, and if he was there before us and I pulled in, he used to take off. I don't know, I didn't know what was happening, what I did to him or not. And then only a little while ago, I remembered his name and who he was. So after that...
So John, that microphone is not transmitting to the audience, it's only going to the video, and people can't hear you, so you just have to speak up, I'm afraid. Excuse me for interrupting.
Right.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Just speak more loudly.
Well, I haven't got a very loud voice, but I was told when I was a young fella, when you're out in the bush, you speak softly, walk quietly, and use your eyes and your ears. So I learned not to talk very loud. But I'll try to keep it up for you. And so when I was 9-year-old, I was told, the nuns told us, well, one of the nuns told me, and then we walked out by the residence, and there was a man there from the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, or Native Affairs as they used to call them those days, and they were discussing us to see where we were going. I had a sister too, but she hadn't been back here for a long time, and she doesn't really want to remember all these things. But they said we could. The nun said to the bloke from the Aboriginal Affairs, well, we can take him to Melville Island, which is off the north coast of Australia. They had a mission there. Well, they were ready to pack my bags and send us up there. But an old uncle of mine, my great uncle, who'd married my grandmother's sister, adopted us. But after that, I don't know what really happened. I don't know how long I spent in the church, in the convent school. I ended up in South Australia, in St Francis House, which was an Aboriginal Church of England boys' home. And it was run by the Church of England. Father Smith was the instigator of getting this going, because the boys went right back to the 1940s that were down there. Some of the names some of you folks might know. Remember Charlie Perkins, John Moriarty, Wilfred Huddleston, who played for Port Adelaide, Malcolm Cooper, who played for Port Adelaide, and all these young blokes that were there. Gordon Briscoe, or Dr. Briscoe now as he is. So these were just some of the blokes that went to St Francis House. But I was only there for 2 years, and I must admit it was the best 2 years of my life because I was away from everything. I came back here and I walked down the street and I started remembering where we used to live and what we used to do there. And everywhere I looked, there was memories of my mother. So I couldn't take much of it. And then later on, I went to tea tree. Our Uncle Alan, he took me out of school at 14, took me up there to help me run the store. The original old store was on the other side of where roadhouse is today. There's a health clinic built on the land where we used to have the tea tree store. So he was there, and he was only there for a couple of months. And the old man was coming back from Alice Springs, the latest store was on, 10 miles south of Alice. There was a circus group coming down. There was 2 truckloads of them. And we seen them past, Lady Rose and I seen them go past the store when we were there. And they were still driving at night with no lights. And he come around the corner and sideswiped him, took the side of the motor car clean off and rolled him over a few times. He actually died from the results that pneumonia was actually set in later on. That he was impregnated, glass was all stuck in his chest from the windscreen and everything else. We sat there for quite some time. But I had to run the store. At 14, I said I'd become a man because I had a man's responsibilities. I was running the post office, and that was all the mail bags used to come in. So once a week with old end to it, and then later on. And I had to sort the mail out, sort the telegrams had to be sent, and all this. So it was a long, hard struggle.
It was a big time, John. It was just like to just reiterate a couple of the points that John's made, because not many people would have endured a childhood of grief like John did. He lost his mum when he was 9, and then his uncle, who had adopted him at 14. He had to become a young man at 14 and take over his uncle's responsibilities. I don't know how many 14-year-old boys could run the tea tree store and become the postmaster, but John did it all. And John, and you'll see from the book, when you read the book, what an incredibly tough time that was for John and how traumatising it was, and he just did not have a sense of who he was or where he belonged. And he said that he would walk, and he just wanted to walk into the scrub and disappear and never come back. And John, there were 3 old blokes who came and helped.
Yeah, as Tanya said, there was times I just wanted to walk, just keep walking into the scrub and disappear. I did get that far one night. I got back and the sun was going down and it was starting to get dark. I just kept going and going, and then all of a sudden the old man said to me, he said, when he was lying in the ground there, 10 mile in the dirt, he said, young fella, he said, look after the old lady. And this hit me in the head like a sledgehammer. So I turned around and I headed back to the store. Here was old Auntie Rose and old Gran. There they knew what was wrong with me, and they were also depressed. But they didn't think I was coming back. But next time I went out, wasn't very long after that incident, I met 3 old men, 3 old Madura old men, and they were going out hunting. And they knew I was depressed. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was just down in the dumps, and I didn't care if I lived or not. But here I was only 14 going on to 15. These old men took me out. They said, come with me, come with us, we'll go hunting. In those days they still hunted with spears and boomerangs, and they walked out and they took us out right down the old telegraph line towards Harding Soak. And we got out a fair way, and then they found the younger bloke, Johnny, he took off and he found a couple of kangaroos, and he went around and stalked them, and then the 2 other old blokes came in from either side. And old Wilfred said to me, he said, young fella, you wait here, don't you make a noise, you just stand here. And I watched him move away, and he was getting ready to throw his spear. And he was standing on one leg. He just lifted back and was standing back, and he was ready to throw. And this kangaroo sat up and looked at him. The old man stood on one leg, and he looked like a dead tree in the distance. And then he let fly with the spear and put the spear right through the kangaroo's chest. And we ended up getting 3 that day. But later on, those old men, they taught me how to hunt with spears and boomerangs. I still got my spears and boomerangs. I got them down in the homelands down in the southwest down there. And they gave me these, so they taught me how to track, tell the difference between a kangaroo track and a wallaby track, a dog track and a domestic dog and a dingo. You know, listen to the birds. And learn to identify them by the noise they make and the way they fly. And one of the things they told me, I wanted to learn a little more about culture and so on. The old bloke looked at me. He sat down on this rock and he looked at me. He said, young fella, he said, when I speak to you, I want it to go in this ear. Don't let it come out this side. You let it stay in here. And in future when you speak, don't just speak from your mouth. Only words come from your mouth. He said, let it come from your heart, from here. And that's when he started to talk to me. That you never interrupt them. You let them keep going until they're ready to stop. If you interrupt him, he'll just get up and walk away and leave you, or turn his back on you. But that's how it was. They taught me a lot about life. Sit, look and listen. You learn a hell of a lot by sit, looking and listening. You learn that I couldn't work out years ago when I was a kid living in Todd Street here. We went down, Mum took us down to the Todd River, that was our playground. And there was quite a lot of bird life around, quite a few people. And she pointed to a bird or something in the tree, and I couldn't see what she was trying to tell me. She grabbed hold of me. I said, Mum, I can't see anything. She grabbed me by the shoulders and spun me around and looked me straight in the eyes. She said, my boy, you've got beautiful eyes, but there's one thing wrong with them, you can't see out of them. But I learned what she meant by that when I went out hunting with this old man. You use your eyes, you use your ears, you use your smell, and you walk quietly and speak softly. And that's what it's all about. I'll let you have a go now, Emma.
Jack, Wilfred and Peter, they were the 3 old men who in a way saved your life and brought you back to your heritage as well. So by now you're about 15, you had £3 in the Commonwealth Bank and that was it. You had no home, you were out working. You did a stint with your Uncle Stuart and he taught you one very important lesson in life, and what was that?
Well, my Uncle Ken, he was known as the Brown Bomber up in Tennant Creek. He'd sooner have a fight than a feed in his younger days, and that's how he was. He and 3 other blokes struck it fairly rich in a coal mine this side of Tennant Creek. I think it was called the Hit and Miss. And they ended up fairly wealthy out of that, but he wasted it. He was a great gambler and a drinker. And the radio bloke asked him one day, he said, Ken, he said, what'd you do with your money? He said, it was like this. It was fast women and slow horses. No, but yeah, he was a tough man. He said, when a teacher was closing down, I said, I had nothing, didn't know where to go. He said, come with me, I'll give you a job. Yeah, I'll pay you. Yeah. I'll give you £15 a week, he said, yeah. But we went out, we was out 6 weeks on Tea Tree Station. We rebuilt the stockyard there. Went from there and had sunk a deepened a well on one of the creeks down there. From there we went to Pine Hill, put up another big windmill there. From there we went across to Mount Denison Station, put up another windmill there at the station. So I moved around a fair bit and come back in, and when I got into town, I said, how about pay? He said, here's £15. He said, I'll pay you the rest later. I'm still waiting for that. He never got it. But I did another job with him later on with mining out at El Tunga. I should have learnt, but the promise of finding all this gold and everything, it really gets it going. And we put a shaft in the Whites Range. It had to go in 100 odd feet. And we had jackhammer, but the first 40 feet we had to bog it off, as you say, clear the face with picks and shovels and crowbars. And we finally got a compressor with a jackhammer and all that sort of stuff, but it didn't have a stand. And so who was the stand? I become the stand for the jackhammer, sitting on my shoulder, blaring away in my ear. That's why I'm deaf as a post now. But yeah, so that was it. But I got paid out of that trip. Not that he gave it to me. I knew the bloke who was subcontracting to, and he said, "How much do you know you?" I said, £45. Oh, yeah, no worries. I'll deduct it out of the cheque, his next payment. So that was my first job. As I said, I wasn't a very wealthy man. I had £3 in the Commonwealth Bank account here in Alice Springs. That's all the money I had. So I met a lot of great old blokes out there. They told me, great philosophers they were, that one of the most important things one told me, don't drink and smoke. He said, the money you'll save, you'll be able to do a world tour. I didn't say to do a world tour, but I saved a lot of money. But later on, you want to go? Well,
yeah. Working for family is not all it's cracked up to be. That is for sure. You're now 17 years old, and there's a story that I find really poignant. You're a very good footballer. You love sport, and you particularly loved football, but you made a decision yourself to stop playing football. Why was that?
Well, I played one season when I came in from out bush, and that was with the Rover Football Club. And I thought, well, I was playing pretty good, and a few blokes got injured, and knocked around. I said, I thought for a while, who's going to look after me if I get injured? I haven't got a home to go to, haven't got anybody to look after me, haven't got any money in the bank. So I gave it up. I enjoyed my sports. Even when I was going to school, I loved to run, play football, cricket, and high jump, and all this sort of stuff. I enjoyed it. But I thought, no, it's no good. I can't do it. So my teenage life was cut short again. But I never had a teenage life. I grew up with men all the time, and that's how I learnt a lot from various old blokes. I say they were great philosophers. A lot of them were ex-servicemen. They were a lot older than me, but I was in charge of them when we were out in the bush in the camp putting up windmills. And they respected me and I respected them. And they taught me many things, those old blokes, and they taught me many things. All we had to do was sit and listen to them, because those old returned servicemen, they don't like to talk about what they've done. And if they've got a good listener, they'll listen to you. They'll talk to you.
Not many 17-year-olds have to give up football because they don't dare be injured, because they don't have a home, they don't have anyone to look after them, they don't have any money. I find that very poignant. And because one of the things was that you didn't have a home in town, and you said you got sick of coming to town with nowhere to stay, like you'd have nowhere to put your swag, you changed direction, and in 1958 you drove tour buses for Len Tuart, and you got into tourism, and that's the start of 40 years of what you describe in your book as tourism, trucks and taxis. Tell us some of your adventures and learnings over those 40 years.
Well, the coaches were quite good, but when I first came in, I was only 18 when I went and asked old Len Tuart for a job. He said, because the tourist industry was only seasonal work then from May through to September. He said, well, he said, the only thing I've got, he said, I'm looking for a grease monkey to service the vehicles. So I said, that'll do, I'll do that. But the reason for that, Mount Gillen was the ex-army camp it used to be for the officers. There was a lot of accommodation there. The staff used to live there too. And I could get 3 meals a day and a roof over my head at night. So I went to old Len, took the job, and I worked until the end of the tourist season, then came back again in 1959. And I got the same job, but that's when I was approached one Saturday afternoon and I was told I was going. And old Dick Locke, who was a foreman, he said, John, he said, old Len wants you to do a tour to Simpson's Gap. What? here I'm a scrub kid. I just came out. I didn't know how to talk to people. I still don't know how to do it. But they said, yes. He said, you can drive that little bus there. And I said, yes. It was a little 13-seater international bus. He said, righto, get in it, drive it down to Mount Gillen, change your clothes, and pick up the afternoon tea and your passengers from Mount Gillen Hotel. Right, here I am shaking in my boots, and I head on down and have a shower and change my clothes. And I had about 6 or 8 people on it. And I never said a word to them. I just said, jump on, your name, check it off. Jump in. When we got to Flynn's grave out there, I said, there's Flynn's grave. I said, you'll find it all information on the notice board over there. And that was my commentary. But we went from there to Simpson's Gap. It was all corrugated old rough old road. We got there and I said, there's Simpson's Gap, go up there. When you come back, I'll have a cup of tea for you. So away they went. I got everything ready, couldn't find any matches. No matches anywhere in the tucker boxes. I didn't smoke. Nobody had any cigarettes. So, being a bush kid, I knew how to survive. I went to the back of the bus and ripped out the electrical wires from the stoplights in the back. Ripped them out and got them a couple of lengths about that long. And lifted the bonnet up, got to the battery and hooked the wires to the battery. And I arced it across and the sparks are on a petrol rag and I got a fire going. But don't try it. But after that, I went to put the billy on, and the wind started blowing, and it blew the flames right back in my face. Burned all my eyebrows, all my eyelashes, and my kiss curl that I used to have in the front. But that was it. That is my introduction and my initiation into the tourist industry. But after that, I did many tours. I was underage. I didn't have a coach licence, and I was doing tours out to Palm Valley, 4-day Palm Valleys. One trip we did across to Mount Isa with the footballers. I was doing a lot of illegal things in my time. But later on, as soon as I turned, in 1960, I was still working there. And then I left and I went south to Old Len Tuarts. Old Len bought a farm down at Drobe. And so he said, if you want a bit of a break from things, he said, come down here, you can do a bit of work. You won't get paid, but you'll get a feed and roof over your head. So I went down, I spent a few months down there and came back again. By that time, I was getting close to 21, and I went and applied for my licence, and got my licence, coach licence, and then within a week, I was driving coaches for Pioneer Tours. So I was the youngest employee of Pioneer Tours, I think in Australia, well, I was here, because they never used to employ anybody under 25 years old. I proved myself going to Palm Valley and all that. The tourist industry was fascinating for me. I made a lot of friends. I should say.
You made a lot of friends, and as part of that, something changed in you and for you. You started to look around and think, I'd like to know more about where I'm taking people, what I'm telling them, and it was the start for you of an investigation into your own heritage and the stories and the history of Central Australia. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
I wanted to learn more about the country and the people, and that was the most interesting thing to me. I wanted to find out more about my grandfather, who came from the Orkney Islands. There wasn't much about him, but I did find out quite a lot later on, many years later. I went to the Orkney Islands. Actually, twice I've been over there now, right through, and all I found was headstones of little families everywhere, bodies lying around everywhere. And actually, I proposed to my Liz on the headstone of one of the little families members in the cemetery. I think it's very romantic, that was. Well, I couldn't ask her anywhere else. I had this little yard around, and she couldn't get away, run away from me. So that's what happened. No, when I was in the tourist industry, the information that was given to coach drivers and what coach drivers used to tell people was a lot of rubbish, and a lot of it wasn't even true. What they told people, they made up their own things as they went along. So when I used to go to the Adelaide, I used to go to the archives and read as much information I could on the early explorers of Central Australia. And I am not only just the explorers, I read into the cattle industry, who were the early explorers, the pastoral industry in this part of the country. I knew everybody, plus I knew a lot of the old men that were still alive and that owned properties up here. That they were real old gentlemen, tough old blokes. And so that was my introduction to it, but I wrote quite a lot on the history of Central Australia for tour guides, the companies that I worked for. I worked for just about every major company in Central Australia. I'd train up the drivers. I'd become driving supervisor, and I'd train the drivers. And when I had enough there, I'd say, right, I'll go to somewhere else. I drove for, say, Pioneers, C88 tours for many years. And old Keith Castle was a great old bloke, and he helped me a lot in the tourist industry. You remember old Keith, don't you? He's 90 years old or something now. Yeah. But he helped me a lot in the early days. And another young lady at the back over there worked for the tourist industry, Angie. But no, there was a lot of people that I made many friends in the tourist industry, and people all over the world, right through Australia and so on.
It was 40 full years. But during that time, there were some difficult aspects that you had to deal with. Do you want to tell us about those and how you survived?
Well, people don't understand really. Racism has been very rife in this country, in this town, for years and years. If it's not directed at you, you don't notice it. But when it is, you notice it all the time. And I used to get a lot of it in the tourist industry, even at Pioneers. I had a couple of tourists come to me in Stanley Chasm one day and said, John, so-and-so was telling us that you're hit with a tar brush. If you don't know what that is, you've got a bit of Aboriginal blood in you. And I said, yeah, and this is how it was. And a lot of it, to me, I think racism is only spread through ignorance and jealousy. And that's what I found. There's people, a lot of the drivers were jealous of what I knew because growing up in this country, I knew about the pastoral industry, I knew about Aboriginal culture, I knew about the flora and fauna because I grew up with it out in the bush. And it came naturally for me, really. And I can tell you about who owned every cattle property around Central Australia, how many head of cattle there, but don't ask me that today. There's so many different strains of cattle now, I can't even pick out one of them. Yeah. But no, racism is, I just had to turn me back and I had to prove that I was just as good as this bloke or even better. Most times I ended up better than he was. And that's how I did it. You know, to me, learning to put up with all this, they like to say, you've got to turn the other cheek sometimes. But no, I put up with a lot over the years and ignored a lot of it. And no, I'll let you go on.
And became stronger from it, and hence the title of the book, that if you haven't yet bought and read, you're going to, On Both Sides of the Fence, because that, you know, is John's life. In a way, he had a foot on both sides of the fence, and he had to deal with the consequences of that. But it did lead, in due course, to the Desert Park, which you say is the best job that you've ever had, despite some of the racist issues you had to deal with. So tell us about the Desert Park.
Oh, well, when I went to the Desert Park, there was a young lady there. Gee, she was tough. Oh, she chased us around with a stock whip. No, that's my ex-boss over there, Jodie Clarkson. Hello, Jodie. Put your hand up. She was there, and there was quite a few other young fellas there, and a lot of young people there that didn't know much about culture or anything. So me and my cousin Johnny Little were the two major teachers there. And we used to give poor old Jodie a rough time sometimes, and you know, even got her getting tin boot polish, so these blokes would polish their boots. Nothing worse than a young bloke going out there dressed up in a clean uniform with dirty-looking boots.
Oh dear.
No, polish your boots every morning. That's you look. That's everybody looks at you down, up and up. Yeah. But no, it was the best. The people there were fantastic to work for. You know, they were all academics. That they may have been academics, but I had the experience of being out in the bush and all that sort of stuff. And they did the right thing by me, and I looked after them and taught them a lot too, I think. Didn't I, Jody?
Well, on that note, I'd like to ask Jody to come up. Jody is the inspiration for this wonderful book. Jody was the person who said to John, you have to get these stories down. And so at the book, Jody's written a few words, and I'd like to invite you up, Jody, to read them. That's it there.
Thank you. I'd been managing the guide team at the Alice Springs Desert Park for a year or so when John's son-in-law, Les, the maintenance man, dropped by my office one morning. My father-in-law's interested in casual guiding. He's worked as a driver guide in Central Australia for over 20 years and has Arrernte heritage. My heart skipped a beat. Cool. Please ask him to drop by whenever it suits him. John arrived the next morning, impeccably dressed. After a very informal cuppa and chat, I gave him a wad of NT government commencement papers. The following week, when I presented him with his employment contract, I remember feeling a sense of anticipation, yet profoundly inadequate. Being a 25-year-old white girl in his presence, I said, "We have so much to learn from you, John. Thank you for joining our team." During his time at the Desert Park, John was the ultimate role model and teacher. He gave our apprentices boot polishing lessons on their first day and kept the rest of us on our toes with knowing looks to ensure we were setting a good example to the young ones. John's morning tracking lessons in Abmaralpa, the sand country, were an amazing gift. I thought I was getting quite good at it until one morning he got me a beauty. "Mate, tell me what made this." I inspected the track. "It's not a bird or a reptile," I said with confidence, as the parallel lines were continuous and there were no individual foot markings. I pondered the track for some time before admitting I had no idea. "Follow it," he instructed. I did so eagerly, and at the end of the track, some 10 metres away, were the makers of the track. A mud dauber wasp was carrying a beetle, and the beetle's legs were dragging in the sand, making the track. I always felt sick in my guts when John and all of our other Central Australian Aboriginal teammates had to deal with ignorant and racist comments and questions from tourists. We workshopped this problem as a team with the aim of creating a more culturally safe work environment. The handout we wrote, called Cultural Manners, enabled tourists to pick up their manners as they entered the park, and we later won a Human Rights Award for this intercultural communication tool. In 2003, as John and I walked away from a memorial service of our dear friend and work colleague, John turned to me and said, "Mate, I want you to do my eulogy." Suddenly struck with his inevitable mortality, I shook myself, hugged his arm and said, "Of course, I'd be honoured. But how about we start by writing your book?" And 17 years later, we published it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jody. That brought me to tears, actually. So many stories, and there are more in the book. And I'm really sorry we're running out of time. So I've just got one more question that I'm going to ask John to talk about, and then I'll open the floor to questions and book signings. But I think something very profound that comes through John's writing in this book is his grandfather, Bill Little, saying to him, always be proud of your heritage, which he has done, especially in writing this story on both sides of the fence. And in that, John, you are about to do the most important thing possibly of your whole life that you've wanted to do since you were 9. Perhaps you'd just like to tell everyone.
Yeah, you really caught me, haven't you? Well, this month, April this month, there's a lot that happened. On the 10th of April this year, it was 72 years since my mother passed away in Adelaide. She died of cancer, by the way, and that's what happened to her. And we couldn't find her grave for over 30 years. We looked and looked, and nobody could tell us where it was. And finally discovered that she was buried in the same grave as another lady from out from Adelaide. And we got permission, and on the 28th of this month, we'll have her remains back in Alice Springs. And we're going to bury him in the old cemetery alongside her mother, across the memorial cemetery on the western side. So there you go, 72 years we waited to get it done. Yeah.
And you'll see at the start of the book, John writes, at the time of writing, he did not know if it would ever be possible, but it was his lifelong dream to bring his mum home, and he's now doing it.
Yeah.
It's very... But would you all please put your hands together for this amazing, amazing living legend of Central Australia. And I will open the floor to questions, but John, before then, is there something else you'd like to finish with?
Yeah, I'd like to say, Tanya, congratulations for tomorrow on your wedding anniversary.
And the same to you.
It's our wedding anniversary also, Liz and I's tomorrow.
Thank you.
We're flying to Adelaide to see our eldest grandson get married. Yeah, he's a young fellow that's moved around a bit. He's spent 8 years in the Australian Armed Forces, and his last stint was a few weeks over in Afghanistan. Then he joined the Northern Territory Police Force. So he's down there, and they're getting married. He's married a young lady who's a doctor, and so there you go. Yeah.
That is very... If anybody heard John on Brashy this morning, John said that one of the main reasons for writing this book was so that his children would know about his life and what had happened in those early years that John said he'd kept inside for so long.
Well, they really didn't know not many people know what it's like to come into Alice Springs and not have a place to go and sleep. In the old days, you didn't have a home to go to. If I find somebody, I would roll the swag out in the backyard on a cyclone bed and then come uptown and get a feed, something like that. It was a hard life, but I got on and survived. And I didn't sit down and feel sorry for myself. This is one of the things the old man told me. Don't sit down and feel sorry for yourself. Get up off your bum and do something. You know? And respect, you don't buy it in Woolworths or Coles, you earn respect. And that's what it's all about. So I got up and I worked. And I said, my elder brother was the same. There was 2 of us, and we had a pretty hard life. But he passed on a few years ago. And he said to me, follow me, brother. And every time he'd let know where there's a good job, a higher money than what we were getting, he'd go and find that out, and we'd both go and work at the same company. So we were just following the money, and that's what it was all about. We had nothing, and we had to get as much as we possibly could. But I did own my own tour business for a while, and the son and I, but I also owned a taxi in Alice Springs. And that was quite an experience, the old taxis. But I had one of those for a few years. Yeah. So that's enough. Yeah.
Thank you, John. There are so many stories, and once you read this book, you realise there are even more stories to come from it. So in the meantime, does anyone have any questions? We've got a couple of moments and then over to book signings. So any questions?
Don't be bashful. Don't bite your hair off.
Good, your story's coming out, John. I heard somebody saying last night how important hope is. And see a lot of people, young people around the moment, that don't seem to have much hope.
Yeah.
I'm a bit hard. I'm deaf as a post.
Sorry.
Your story's inspirational. This gentleman's glad that you've told it because it gives hope, and there are a lot of kids around at the moment who don't have hope, that sense of hope.
Well,
I hope I summarised that.
yeah. Well, I don't know about not having hope. You hope every day is better than the last one. You know, you just got to keep going. You've got to use this for a change. Learn to think for yourself. If you never learn to think for yourself, you won't be any good for yourself or anybody else. So, I met up with a lot of old men in my time, and great philosophers, and they gave me a lot of good advice. One of the good things they taught me: don't borrow money off relations, don't lend money to relations. Yeah? If you want money, go to the bank. Yeah? And that's what I did. But no, racism in this town, it's not just one side of the fence, it's on both sides. It's not only white people, Aboriginal people, it's both sides. Yeah, I did it from both sides. Yeah. So, you know, one was calling me a black so-and-so, and another one was saying, you think you're a white man, you're black so-and-so. You know, there it goes. And I was doing a talk at the Desert Park many years ago, and this lady was sitting there with, it was a cultural talk, and there was about 6 or 8 people there, and this lady had 3 children, and I introduced myself and told them who I was, my heritage and so on, and I was in a talk about 10 or 15 minutes, and this lady put her hand up. I said, yeah, man, what's wrong? She said, John, I thought this talk was being done by an Aboriginal man. Well, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. I said, lady, all my life I've been called a black so-and-so. Now you tell me I'm not black enough to do this talk. I said, I teach all these young kids about culture and everything else. And that's how it was. And she was very apologetic. I felt sorry for the poor lady. But no, there was another lady. She really embarrassed me one day, but I embarrassed her too. She asked me a very personal question, and I asked her a very personal question. Yeah, so that was it. She never came back a second time.
Well, I think how John, I mentioned this at the start, and I think it's worth repeating to finish, that his aim is to demonstrate through this book that though life may be full of challenges, sadness and adversity, and John, you've had no shortage of them, it is still possible to be strong and proud, to make good and to find happiness. So thanks again, John.
Thank you all, folks. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening.
And happy anniversary for tomorrow.